Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out the small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Arik Eisenkraft. He is the Chief Medical Officer for BioBeat. Arik, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Nick. Pleasure to be here.
So BioBeat just recently announced their approval from the FDA for this really what I consider quite a revolutionary device. Before we dive into that, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to this position, if you would.
So I'm a pediatrician, but actually never practiced pediatrics. I retired a few years ago from the Israeli Ministry of Defense and the IDF Medical Corps. And for more than 20 years, I've been conducting research on mass events, emergency response. And through that, actually, for me, it was quite natural to join BioBeat on this quite amazing quest to provide better health and better monitoring to all those who need that, wherever they are and whenever they are. And just a small correction, the FDA gives clearance, not an approval, and this is very important.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. You're absolutely
very important. Yeah. And we're very happy with that, very proud, but there's still a lot of work to do. It's still the beginning, and we are learning more and more as we move forward.
Fantastic. So obviously interesting background, obviously lots of relevant experiences. If you would just share a little bit about the BioBeats device, what it is, and how it works.
So basically we're talking about a medical grade monitoring platform that includes sensors that were all developed in-house together with our own algorithms. It is based on optical technology, photoplethysmography, similar to pulse oximeters, yet we managed to refine and get a better sensor, and this really helps us to measure quite accurately not only heart rate and saturation, but quite many other vital signs, including blood pressure and heart rate variability and respiratory rate and stroke volume and cardiac output, quite a lot of cardiopulmonary parameters. All are measured non-invasively, wirelessly. The data is transmitted in real time. We have two configurations of these sensors. The first is in the shape of a wristwatch, and this is quite misleading because this is a medical grade monitoring device. And the second is a patch. The wristwatch is intended more for chronic use, people at home or in home care facilities that we want them to be monitored for long periods of time. So it works for 3 days before you need to recharge it. It takes about up to 2 hours and you continue with the monitoring. The patch is intended more for pre-hospital and in-hospital use. It is disposable, works currently for up to 5 days, and then you simply discard it. Having it work for 5 days allows you to monitor most of the patients in hospital for all the time they are in the hospital, and even a day or two after they are discharged. So we really think that this allows you an end-to-end solution, providing real continuum of care, using the same device on the patient for the whole period he really needs to be monitored.
So that's fantastic. So let's focus in on the technology for a second, because this is not something that people haven't tried before. I think there have been others certainly that have attempts have been made. I think almost exclusively when we talk about user usable devices, the ability to measure blood pressure has been associated with a cuff of some description. I was excited right up until I discovered that the watch that was announced, I think it was Omron, was essentially a cuff in the watch, which, just not interesting, in part because you have to inflate it, you got to deflate it, it's not a continuous. And now you're talking about something that is using a completely different methodology to measure that. So you mentioned
different approach.
Right.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a couple of things in there that I think are key. So one is the sensors. So I think people are familiar for the most part with pulse ox. So we've done that very successfully. It's very accurate. People use it all the time. But you're doing something else. So help us understand what's going on and what was the innovation? What was the sort of inflection point that got BioBeat into this circumstance where suddenly you go, wow, now I have continuous, essentially passive monitoring of blood pressure?
So one of the founders of BioBeat is Israel Sarusi, which I think sold in the last 30 years more pulse oximeters than anyone else in the world.
Oh, really?
Wow. A lot of experience on that. And he was basically one of the first people that started talking about reflective photoplethysmography. So you were showing nicely how you hold your finger, but when we're talking about reflective photoplethysmography, the light doesn't pass through the tissue. We actually collect the reflection.
Right.
And from that moment on, you can shape it as a wristwatch or as a patch. And when we put it on a person, it doesn't have to be on the wrist or on the finger. You can put it everywhere and still you get these measurements. And they are mainly reflective of what is happening in the large vessels. And so even in cases in which you have hypoperfusion, in which cases when you usually use a pulse oximetry, you're actually losing the signal. And this is quite frustrating to healthcare providers. In our case, you still get a very robust signal. And that's one of the advantages. And if you add to that the algorithms that analyze the PPG wave that we collect, then you get a very clean signal. And from that, you can now measure not only the pulse and the saturation, but all other vitals that I mentioned before.
Tell us a little bit about the journey. So obviously, this history of working and deeply involved in pulse oximetry and all of the challenges that, most of us, I think, would sort of gloss over. We wouldn't even know about because it's not sort of our domain. Clearly played a part, but were there any specific insights that came about through that process that really turned into an inflection point for the company?
Well, the basic thing that started everything was one of the military operations in Israel about 5 years ago, in which some of us were confronted with situations in which we had a mass casualty event and we didn't have good enough tools to triage and monitor and prioritize the evacuation of these casualties. And this is so frustrating. And that was, I think, the first turning point that caused the founders to come together and decide that something has to be done. And with the amazing background of Israel and the innovation from other members of the company, we've started looking at the technology and testing it on ourselves and refining and understanding what we actually see. And it was a slow start, but it became quite a journey because within 4.5 years we got to where we are now. 2 products in the market. In Europe, we already have a CE mark approval of all of these vitals. With the FDA, we are very proud and happy to move forward step by step getting the clearance for different vitals. We still have several more to complete. I think that, you were talking about a turning point. We were quite naive at first. When we went to the Europeans, we brought the whole package, and it was quite tough to go through all the tests and the audits. But we went through that, and we got the approval, and then we said, wow, that's great. Let's do the same with the FDA. So we went with the package to the FDA, and I guess that, again, as I said, we were naive, and they told us very simply, well, sorry, that's not the way we do that. You cannot come with such a package. This is too much. And I can understand that, of course. And so the journey with the FDA is slower, step by step. And happily for us so far, we managed to get the clearance for pulse and saturation. And the next step was to provide them with the package on blood pressure. So, and then we got not long ago the approval for non-invasive cuffless blood pressure measurement using PPG. And this is very important because there are different pathways with FDA. We chose to go through the 510K. Mm-hmm. So you must provide a predicate device. That's what we did. And we plan to move forward to get the approval of several other of these vitals, just like we did in Europe. And that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work because for each parameter, you conduct clinical studies and you do it right. So you have to have the right numbers of patients, and not only healthy individuals, of course, and not only animals, of course. And then you go through the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, and that's a challenge, but we love it because we learn new things each and every time. And remember, since we aim to provide these devices not only in hospital but also at home, some of the studies we conduct are not the ordinary kind of clinical studies, because some of those are conducted outside, not in the hospital environment, on active people that move around. We've now almost completing a study in which we compare the commonly used blood pressure halter based on a cuff to our wristwatch and patch. So just imagine that someone is suspected of having a hypertension, for example, and a delivery guy comes to his home, gives him a patch, tells him, okay, you put it here, follow the instructions, you press one button, and 24 hours, he gets an automatic call that tells him, thank you, sir, you can now discard the patch. And a day later, he gets the full analysis. The data was transmitted to the physician or to the clinician. So we really think that these kind of things could transform the way we do everything in healthcare, but we have to prove it. And looking how it works, looking at connectivity, looking at the workflow, these are not just slogans. These are really things you must look thoroughly. And this is something we're really engaged in all the time now.
Fantastic. So for those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and today I'm talking to Professor Arik Eisenkraft. He is the Chief Medical Officer for BioBeat. They just recently received their clearance from the FDA for their device. It is a non-cuff based continuous blood pressure monitor. We were just talking about some of the implementations, the background. It'd be remiss of me if I didn't ask you. So I've certainly heard, there's no question, and there are people that sort of resist this notion and say, that's impossible. It's just not possible to measure based on the parameters that you're describing. Help the listeners understand how it is that you've overcome the challenge of connecting something that is not, it's not blood pressure, right? You're not measuring blood pressure. You're essentially deriving it from other signals. Can you help explain how it is that you've managed to achieve that?
Well, I cannot go all the way and tell exactly the things because there are some of our major patents are on.
Understood.
We basically managed to change the signal to noise ratio using our sensors and employing our algorithms. And by doing so, the level of background noise is dramatically changed. And then a whole new world is open in front of you, and you can detect other vitals that so far were not really seen. I cannot go more into details on that, but I can tell you that I fully understand all the criticism. As you said, there were so many previous attempts to achieve that using different technologies and also the same technology. But I think that we have the data to show that. The fact that we are a small startup company doesn't help us to move forward with publications, for example, but that's one of the main things we're doing now. We're now in the middle of the effort to complete several manuscripts to show everyone what we're talking about and answer all the criticism. Again, I can understand the criticism, but I think we have good answers, and we want to show that in the form of professional medical manuscripts that will describe what we did. There are several thousands of people that participated so far in several clinical studies. Most were conducted in Israel, and we were comparing our device and our technology to other commonly used devices, both invasive and non-invasive, and you know, it works. You know, I can tell you that the first time that I met the folks at BioBeat, I was still not part of the company. I was conducting a swine study, a swine model of hemorrhagic shock, and it was part of what I'm doing still in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, trying to find new devices and medications to save lives in the field. And these two guys came to me and told me, listen, we're looking for Arik. I told them, well, you found him. And they said, well, someone told us that we should speak. And we started to talk. It was quite amazing to hear what they were talking about. And they were talking about these sensors, of course. And I told them, listen, I have this model here. It is a study that is running already, so no need to pay for anything here. Bring your stuff. Let's try it. And for a few days on several animals, I was amazed because I saw the results when you compare it not to the non-invasive devices. At shock, as I said before, in shock, they don't work anymore. They don't show you anything. We compared it with arterial lines, with Swan-Ganz catheters, all the invasive measures that you only see them actually in intensive care units or in the operating room. And it was amazing. I mean, it was basically the same. And just imagine that you have a patch on you that gives you everything. You don't have to be invasive, no adverse events, so simple. And so that's the beginning of my journey in BioBeat. And soon after I joined the company, and since then we've completed several relatively large studies. You know, we've conducted a study on more than 1,000 participants comparing the blood pressure cuff to our device. And this was part of the data that was provided to the FDA and to other regulatory agencies. And now we found that we find ourselves struggling to focus. That's the truth, because there are so many possibilities. You know, we had a very nice collaboration with an airline. They wanted to see whether we can monitor people during flight.
Right.
And so we had a small crew in a European country. A small group stayed in Israel, and 5 cabin crew members during the flight in an airplane with the Wi-Fi had on themselves patches and wristwatches. And at the same time, they were monitored during the flight in Israel and in this other country. It was amazing to see, and everything in real time. Of course, they were jumping and drinking, and just to show how the vitals change. And so you see that you have here now something that can provide better monitoring capabilities, and this could change a lot of things, not only in the everyday life and not only in hospital. Just think about clinical research. Think about pharma companies that want to see whether the drugs are really helpful. So these are all things we are looking at and doing right now. And again, I agree with the criticism that it is our job to give the answer and to show the data. And that's exactly what we are doing.
So that's great. So and obviously understand the challenge of, protected information and so forth. But I think that gives people a sense of essentially the sort of underlying tenet here is cleaning up the signal that has allowed you to find essentially data points in there that were previously impossible to see because of the noise, essentially, is my sort of assessment of that. And I think the most compelling thing is that you as a physician and a scientist, clearly doing research, you were persuaded, you went into this going, yeah, okay, I'll try it, but not convinced. But you were convinced by the data when you were, and if I heard you correctly, this was not external measurements, but internal. So arterial lines, Swan-Ganz catheters. Yes. In fact, interestingly, when you were first describing the product, the first thing I wrote down was wedge pressure, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I remember having to do that in the sort of interventional challenge, and the difficulty. And here we are, we're talking about something. It's just absolutely fascinating. I think it is an inflection point in terms of the data opportunities. I'm so excited for you. Unfortunately, we're sort of nearing the end. If you could, in just a brief outline, what's next? What are you up to, and what are you hoping to achieve?
So we're going to look at different use cases in different hospital departments. For example, spot measurements instead of the nurse in the general ward, or replacing the invasive devices in post-surgery units, providing better monitoring of home patients, for example, with congestive heart failure, aiming to reduce rates of readmission, helping pharma companies. And we have some very interesting projects with different governmental agencies, mainly in the US, looking at natural history of different diseases like flu, like other infections, with the aim of helping everyone understand how this is happening.
Fantastic. So I think, as you described, you're sort of almost challenged by the wealth of opportunities and, have to focus. I think a clear recognition of, the need to sort of prove it to those that, question the capabilities, the possibilities. And, obviously we look forward to that. Very excited for you that you've received the FDA clearance. I think that's a fantastic step. I know that is a non-significant challenge to overcome. And, congratulations to you. Just remains for me to thank you for taking the time. I know obviously it's been busy. This was an exciting announcement. I'm very grateful to you for joining me on the show and sharing some of the details. I think this is an exciting time, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's coming next.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, The Incrementalist, or share with me at DrNick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at healthcarenowradio.com, and tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, The Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.